the Rangers Journal Night.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Rangers Journal podcast here on YouTube. I'm your host tonight. I am Stephen Wilson, and we are going to be talking about a subject which, when you talk about footballers, is not really one that you seem to really see as an issue, but supporting a club like Rangers, it seems to be something that we have to talk about with every single squad we have here, because we'll be talking about a bit about the Rangers mentality of the squad that we've got currently in the moment, as well as the kind of synergy that brings between the club and its support. So a subject that will definitely be one that will be of interest to many of the supporters. And joining me to discuss this particular issue, we have Scott Cameron here. Scott, Cammy, how you doing?
I'm very good. Just as we were talking before we came on, close season, things are a bit quiet. So it's good to go back over things that have sort of happened and how we want things to try and change moving forward for us to be successful.
Yes, absolutely. It's a massive summer coming. I feel like we've been saying that for the past couple of years, but this one, more than anything, is a massive one. And we seem to be getting the early indications that there will be no messing about as we've had in previous years. Before me and Cammy go into the subject, obviously, please hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to us on. As we mentioned in the intro, every night is Rangers Journal Night, and we've got so much content still going on in this close season. Scott Mackay has done a great job of collating a bit of a schedule ongoing where most people are struggling. So yeah, so much content coming over before, during and after the Euros as we go into the 2024-25 season. So Cammy, as I kind of alluded to there, the word mentality seems to be one that's branded around the squad so much in the last probably 4 to 5 years, even at that point. You often see talk about the big winners in football, the likes of the guys that play for the Real Madrids and something like that. You don't really see that being questioned, but so often it's so big moments. It's something that gets labelled so much about so many players that have been in this Rangers squad in the last couple of years.
To be honest, I think there's a bit of scar tissue, and I think I think as supporters there's certainly scar tissue. So whether you're earning 20 grand a week or not, there's still scar tissue. You know, you're not immune to that, and I think that's an issue. You know, I mean, I think if you could start from scratch with a fresh squad, then it's a different situation. You know, but I think particularly captain, vice captain, and this is not a critique, a character assassination of Tav and Golson, but I think they have had their share of second prizes, and I think that that over a period of time does affect your. It does. It's human nature. You know, you can be the most positive and the most driven individual, and good as part of the group, but you know, just being able to get. I mean, we obviously watched the Champions League final, and by no means comparing Real Madrid's quality, but that's a club.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if your mics went. I can't really hear you.
You know,
Yeah, I can hear you now, man. Sorry.
God, after all of that,
I thought it was my stuff there. Sorry.
I,
Uh,
mm,
I got to the point you talked about Real Madrid.
I mean, I think it's like Real. We obviously watched the Champions League final, Real Madrid's, and their support. And I think as a supporter, the Real Madrid fans they know that they've got it in them to just do enough to get over the line. I think the big issue with the Rangers squad over recent years is when there's an expectation, when if you win this game and this game, you'll go 5 points clear, and that I think that they can, when they need to, they can dig out a Betis away performance. And don't think anybody expected that. So there is the ability within there to go into a difficult situation. I personally just think that when they've almost got the trophy in their hands, they struggle to get over the line and just do enough when it truly matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're spot on what you mentioned about the likes of the Goldson and Tavernier. I mean, obviously with the two of them, it's hard to kind of question too much. Obviously, what they put in on the pitch, performance-wise, so many times over their 10 years at the club. But when you combine the scar tissue, as you mentioned, with what is evidently a decline in both players' physical abilities, as we've seen over the past, I wouldn't even say the past 6 months, probably the past month, 2 months. It seems to be quite dramatic how they went down. You combine that with the lack of, trophies in the cabinet, and it really does take a toll on the players. It's not just sometimes they players that kind of affect it. It can sometimes feed down the team, because you kind of, the word leaders are really banished about too much when it comes to this club. Sometimes it's leadership group. No, it's not. There should be so many people just leading in every area. So when it kind of filters down that way, it will kind of get there. So you kind of need to almost question, in a way, is it a case of we just need, less, kind of make sure that at the first point that you don't get any weak players at all in the squad? Or is it just, if you mentioned ideally, if you kind of could just do a reset, you would love to do it, but unfortunately football doesn't really work like that. You try to reset and you have to try and get dynamics on the pitch, relationships between guys in the attacking area, and sometimes it's not as easy to kind of get, but it just seems to be when we kind of ship somebody out that kind of we think isn't quite got that mental, strength, we don't really replace it at the moment, which is something Clement needs to really try to work on.
I mean, to be honest, I think that's I have. It's for a different podcast. I do have concerns over the level of what people are expecting to happen in one summer transfer window. I don't think it's all fixable. The situation with the two players, my worry with regard to them, I mean, you could bring in 5 players into the starting lineup. Ideally, you bring players in that have been winners, and their sort of experience and mentality and ability helps the other players, sort of, even the experienced ones like Tav and Golson. I'm saying this because I do believe both players will still be there next season. I know there's an ongoing issue with regard to that, but I think we as a support mainly look at bringing in good players, and it isn't just being able to beat a man and stick the ball in the back of the net. There's that's where the job of Philip Clement and Niels Koppen is so, and the recruitment team generally is so difficult. It isn't just about, but until that player is wearing that blue jersey, you don't know whether they have the. All you can do is look at what they've potentially done previously. Somebody's, I don't know, they've played for Liverpool. I'm not saying we're signing somebody, but somebody that's been through a situation, they've won a league title in another country, or they've had signs of adversity, and they've managed to come through it and that sort of thing. So in an ideal world, you sign a great player that can play number 6, that can be a strong personality in the dressing room, a strong personality on the park, a positive influence on other people. These players cost these people, these personalities cost plenty of money, and that's it's not in an ideal world. You bring in 3 or 4 strong personalities that are also good players, and they have the positive influence across the players that are new and the players that have been there for longer.
Yeah, I think I've heard a lot of people mention that when it comes to the discussion of why Leon Balogun was given an extra year, because obviously, in all due respect to Leon, he's not going to be, well, we hope he's not going to be playing regularly next season, but he seems apparently to be that type of guy who behind the scenes is a good influence on, younger players, the kind of players who are coming into the club. Even though he's only been here for a total of 3 seasons over his 2 spells, he seems to get what it's like to be here, kind of gets, what the supporters want. And that's kind of, it's not just obviously the guys who are playing, 90 minutes every week. You've got to have these guys who can, if they need to step in, they can kind of have that impact. And I think that's what a good thing about a guy like Balogun is. I think we talk about that. I mean, the other guy they probably would have looked at similarly would have been Ryan Jack, but obviously, Leon's got his injuries, but not to the same extent as Ryan Jack. So it's having these guys who can obviously step in. But I think the other thing as well we look at maybe is for all of Michael Beale's faults for his recruitment last season, he got guys in like Butland and Sterling who seemed to very early on just get it, while as you could maybe question some other players who have come in the last couple of years who have come in and not have just kind of thought that it was going to be a walk in the park type place to come up here and play this club, but it's not really that case, especially when you have to win week in, week out, which feeds into it. You want to have guys who are out there are winning it. You get a guy like Butland who, he had, if the rumours last year at this point were true, he had an offer on the table from Man United, his boyhood club. He would have been 4th choice keeper, but it's a lot of money for a guy in your early 30s, and chose to come up here. You get a guy like Dujon Sterling, who a couple of days after his manager and his captain were very blasé about some results, he came out and said that we were absolutely rotten. So these aren't guys who have won trophies at regular camp. It's just people who seem to get what it's like to be a top football, what it brings to be a top footballer. And I think that's quite refreshing as well, as opposed to, and these are 2 guys brought in for free. So I think it's what you mentioned about good recruitment, just finding not just good players, but people who just get what it's like to be a serial, winner.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's. I think in the last couple of years we have lost strong personalities within the dressing room. Scott Arfield was another one. You go back a year, Ryan Jack. I'm not saying certainly to have kept either player, but this is where the 2 players that you've mentioned have came in and have had they say the right things, and by their actions and you would imagine that within the confines of the dressing room that you're hoping that open and honest and frank conversations have went on. I mean, that always used to be the thing. You go back to Walter and that era, the successful Rangers teams, there was always points in the season where they would go. I'm not saying go on the beer for a couple of days, but they would team build, and then they would almost get that siege mentality, and over the course of that last 12 weeks of the season, they would just steamroller teams, But I mean, if you could recruit this summer, I think we're linked with a lot of younger players, and I think it's unusual to have a young player like Dujon Sterling coming from the English Premiership and being so, like, he just looks as though he gets it, And I think if you can recruit another 2 or 3 younger, fresh, hungry. They've got the desire. That it all feeds and helps the whole group just to basically believe a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think there's been so many discussions mentioned about players that would be classed as unsellable assets at the club. There's not many of them, but I think Sterling would be pretty high on many people's list as kind of that one. Ideally, Butland would be too, but we all know Butland has a potential sell-on value to himself being English, but you're kind of thinking the same brackets. You mentioned obviously Walter Smith there, and kind of the guys on the Walter Smith podcast we did a couple of weeks ago. They mentioned quite a lot. Kevin Thompson on that mentioned quite a lot about that team who just had a mentality that they could win regardless of what the circumstances were, regardless of their ability. And I think, obviously, to a lesser extent, I'm not going to compare the two managers. I can't compare Walter really with anybody who managed this club, but Clement did for that spell in January to beginning of March. It seemed like he was getting a turn out of these guys and kind of shifting that mentality. It seemed at points. Obviously, it went back to type later on the season, which I don't think too many people could fault him for, maybe aside from the game at Parkhead, where it seemed like he didn't really get his tactics the way they probably should have been. But even in the Scottish Cup final, he seemed like if he had the players with a better mentality and a better ability, they could have got something from it. So it seems like he's got something there. Looking back just at that small spell, Cammy, do you feel like there is some level of encouragement that if he gets a better, mental group of players in there and ones that kind of suit how he wants to play, that he could kind of shift his team to be more of a we can win no matter what?
I think he needs, with it going back, I think he needs his best players on the pitch. I think he needs his style, the way that he wants to play. He needs his wide players. He needs, I go back to February and you think back at Todd Cantwell scoring to beat Aberdeen that midweek game. You beat Hearts 5-0. You go to Kilmarnock, don't play particularly well, lose an early goal, come back, win 2-1. That the time you're talking about, that's where you just every sort of what you felt were challenging fixtures. If we can just get through this one, if we can get just through this one, get through this one, get to that point. I think we all thought at the start of March that we were the only thing for me that remained at that point was beating Celtic, because that ultimately is still. And I think even at the end of February, you were thinking, right, we've got them in the early part of April. We're going to have to go across the city and play them before the end of the season. That's ultimately that's what you're judged against. But across that period, we were winning away at Hibs. We were winning you were winning the home games against the better sides that out with Celtic sort of situation, So I think if he gets his players on the park, whether I think the players on the park to play his way. I could go off and talk about having a plan B and being able to adapt to not having wide players and that sort of situation. But I do have a confidence that if he gets the players on the park that he wants to play the way he wants to play, I think there is signs that we could be successful. It's not guaranteed, but there were signs that he was getting a turn out of what we all said wasn't a supremely talented Rangers squad.
Yeah, I remember that night at Kilmarnock. That first half was one of the worst first half of football I'd seen in a while. And then we come out second half, turned it around the way we did. And I thought that was a massive, mentality shift in this squad, how they could do that. I didn't think we'd have done that under Beale. And then 3 days later, we lose to Motherwell. And then that began that unfortunate downturn cycle. But you did that Celtic reference that you mentioned to is so important, because you kind of, that game at Ibrox that happened in the middle of that spell, we came into that looking like, well, we should win this. And then we're 1-0 down 20 seconds later, and that's when you kind of worry about the mentality again. Though they was able to kind of pull something out of it, but at the same time, we still kind of fell short. I mean, the perfect example of mentality in that game, other than the 22nd one, was the way we made it to 2 each in the 80-something minute. Looked like we were in the ascendancy and we could probably maybe come away with 3 points, and then they go straight up the park and score. It's just a kind of typicalness of it. And now with losing the final game of the season in the league against them at Parkhead, losing that goal in the 90th minute at Hampden, it does put the pressure, as many people mentioned, on Clement for the first Old Firm, which will be at Parkhead. And that's where he needs to kind of get more these guys winning, that kind of winning mentality again. And I do worry. I'm not meaning to be harsh on Tav and Goldson, because their service has been fantastic. But if you're still going into that game with them in there, they have that scar tissue. They have that issue with the kind of, Tavernier especially. All Rodgers will need to do is go, I'm going to play Maida. Maida could have barely kicked the ball up any point in that season. At that point, but he sticks him on him and Tavs are gone. So it's kind of getting kind of replacing them with somebody who can kind of feel like I could go there and do a result. It could be young players in the Sterling mode, but it could be guys who have done it maybe on the continent and done so well. And Postecoglou, when he came to Celtic, got all those guys in from the Japanese league who had done, who'd been doing well there, and they came straight in. I mean, Hatate and Maida were the ones who came straight back in for that ill-fated night at Parkhead in February 2022, and we get ripped to shreds. So it's, as you mentioned, it's just vital that we have people who not just can quality to beat the weird teams, but to have that, to go right in there with Celtic, because they're not going to get any, breathing period for the Old Firm games. They need to win that first one, or at least, come away with a positive result.
I think we're going to go into what is going to be a challenging start to the season with two European qualifiers. You're going to have to hit the ground. Have to hit the ground running, because you don't want the same movie to play out. You don't want to be October, November time, manager under pressure. Annual change of manager, you get a bounce, etc. So I think I don't want to talk about across the city, but I don't pay a lot of attention to what they do. But I don't look at them and see a really, really team that's full of full of leaders, if that makes sense. I can see a team that's full of, they've lifted a lot of trophies, and that, I would look at Carter Vickers at the back, their spine probably, Joe Hart, Carter Vickers, McGregor in the middle of the park, I think is that's their. I would look at them and say they are the leaders, and that's only effectively three players. The likes of O'Reilly, by his influence, shows leadership qualities and to influence big games. But I think that they're in a position where they have, very similar to refer to that Walter Smith side. I think that's almost where Celtic are at this point in time, that they know that they can. The cup final was the case in point. Didn't play particularly well, but they know when they get an opportunity, they're going to see it. And it's how the manager, the conversations that happen in the summer, pre-season, when they go away, all that sort of stuff. That's the conversations that have to happen, But I think that scar tissue is a is a real issue, and I would personally love to see a fresh a Rangers side starting Celtic at the end of August as possible. And again, it's like you say, not being completely dismissive of Tav and Goldson, but I just go back to the amount of times that Tav's had a misplaced pass at Celtic to give a goal away. Go back to the Gerrard era. He's up against Maeda. The scar tissue in Tav's head as well isn't just losing the game. It's I've had the run around the last 5 Old Firm games against this guy. So it's like you're coming up against an opponent as the Rangers captain, knowing that you're going to have your own work cut out to deal with your own opponent. Never mind have the ability to positively influence the actual your teammates in the actual game. So you could speculate is that something that the manager sees as an issue? There's a lot of speculation flying about, but I think that the Rangers support, I think those two players are what I would call a lightning rod. Anytime there's something negative and they're associated by it, they could have 9 out of 10 performances. If in the 10th game it's away to Celtic and it all goes pear-shaped, what they've done the previous 9 games is forgotten. So how the manager goes towards changing that, I'm not really sure, but I think that there's so many facets to being a winning Rangers player. It's if you could give them a bottle of it and say drink that for the next 6 weeks, and when you start the season you're suddenly going to have that ability, then it would be great.
Yeah, unfortunately, football in real life's not like the second half of the basketball game in Space Jam. Bugs Bunny puts the bottle of water in, and it doesn't quite work out in that particular way. And you mentioned about Tav. The thing about, I always remembered when we first got back up in the league, and he had a torrid time to begin with against Scott Sinclair, but he managed to adapt and get the better of him. But that was 6-7 years ago now, and he's not the same physical player in that one. So at that point, he had the legs that he could, get back and cover it. But similar with Goldson, he was kind of, when Goldson got signed, he was there, they could cover in there, but now the two of them just don't have it. And as you mentioned, I think the lightning rod aspect of it is because, the last real 2 players we've got left now from that era now that Jacko's away. But in terms of it's interesting the you mentioned about how the fans perceive things, and that plays a big part into it as well, because the classic example, you talk about the spine of teams, the spine of the Rangers team for so long last season, even under Clement for most of it, included John Lundstrom. Now, John Lundstrom, just on his day, the run to Seville, even that point to begin with under Clement, showed that he could be a leader to get in there, but his slumps in mentality or his slumps in form kind of coincided with each other, and it was kind of painful to see it at points in time. But at the same time, he seemed like a guy who Clement really liked. A lot of people thought it was going to be a nail on that, regardless of how bad his form was slumping, he was going to be here for the coming season. But that now appears to not be the case, which I think is an interesting thing to kind of see, because we appear to now have with Clement and maybe the board above him, that they seem to have one ear on maybe what the fans are thinking on that one. Obviously, Clement said in the press conference, "I'm not going to judge what I do on the fans," but he can even they seem to be on the same page, which I think you need to kind of have in some degree between the club and your support, because if you're not having that, then things are going to be a bit wrong. I mean, we've had petty examples towards the end of the season where we had the likes of Fabio Silva. He was doing the daft celebrations. We had the Schussberger incident with Todd Cantwell on social media. and we've had it for so long in the past, even stemming back to Pedro Caixinha and the Bush, Progress Niederkorn. Other than maybe when the points where Gerrard was there, we just didn't feel like for about a decade we've had that kind of link in. And I think that if you don't have that, it will eventually feed onto the pitch. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at just as importantly as who we get in the door.
I think the ability to, I think I've used the expression a few times, read the room. I think that's a whole pod. That's a whole pod in itself, But I think that the Rangers support, I think, if we start next season with those players in the starting lineup, you could have signed five of the best players to play alongside them. But I think a lot of people are just wanting a fresh start. To be honest with you, I think that's and I would probably put myself in that. Whilst being appreciative of service, I think you can't. We have been too loyal to too many players for too long, and I think that it's this summer and this next sort of 6-8 weeks, I think will tell us a lot as to how, is it just end of cycle or is it complete, like, start from scratch sort of thing, But I think there is a negative psychology with regard to the support. I think if you go into next season with the same people, it's the old insanity situation. Just continue more of the same, and how that plays out, I really don't know. We all know the rumours that refuse to go away. I think there's a lot of people pinning hope that Steven Gerrard's going to just come and take two players off your hands and everything's. But I think something has to give. But I'd be interested to know the conversations that have actually happened between those players and the manager and the club, and because there's so many factors, contractual situation to 2026 for both players. So they can Tava's captain has spoken about wanting to be Rangers captain that gets a testimonial. It's without looking too far ahead, I'm thinking, my God, if you get to that 10-year point and Celtic have lifted another 2 league titles, good luck selling out 50,000 at Ibrox, because I think that the problem that you've got, and I know that this whole discussion's meant to be about mentality and that sort of situation and how it's been and how it changes moving forward, but I think that it's a real $1 million one, how we can address that.
Yeah, I mean, you could be somewhere, you could be in any job in any work line for 10 years, but if you can bugger all chauffeur at the end of it, then what's the point? You could at least look at McGregor's one last year. He at least had a bit more to show for his full tenure, but it's a bit different with this one. You mentioned about the support, and that's something that really a lot of people say is sometimes our support can be a bit too, want to things to just react very quickly to anything. I mean, great examples of Oscar Cortez on Friday. Saturday, there was talk that they wanted to sign him permanently, and everybody was going mental, going, well, why have we kept him here for all this time? And then one day later, it's announced, I've got my loan with an option for that fee. So there's that aspect of it. So that kind of goes in as well to things. Do you think, from a support point of view, if we get rid of all these players hypothetically, we kind of refresh the squad, it gets kind of done into redone. We start the season well, but say we lose at Parkhead, could you foresee a point where the fans would have some level of patience with what Clement is doing? Or do you think if he just can't get over that hurdle right away, but he's done everything else right, per se, that he will get the benefit of the support? Or do you think if he doesn't do that, it could just be rinse repeat as it have done in the last couple of years?
I think I personally think he would get my buy-in. Certainly with regard to that. I just think by continuing to do the same thing, and the same personnel are going to continue to. But I think a fresh captain, and just somebody, a different person leading, a different person with the armband on. I remember many years ago when Dick Advocaat took the captaincy off Lorenzo Amoruso and gave it to Barry Ferguson. I can't even remember what age Barry was at the time, but that sort of situation does Philippe Clement think that is something that he could do? He may retain James Tavernier as a Rangers player, but Jack Butland, for example, is the Rangers captain. Not that I'm advocating a goalkeeper as your captain sort of situation, but I think that I personally think as long as you're seeing progress, a great thing for me is as long as I can actually see what we're trying to do, and the way that we're playing, the tempo, etc., just the performances, creating chances, etc., etc. And if you're doing that, the results might be a bit bumpy because it depends how many changes to the starting lineup there is. I've said that if we think back to the summer of 2021, and we were in a position of strength, and we've had 8 transfer windows since then. Would that be right? Six.
Yeah, maybe.
So everyone has been a bit of a shambles, to be perfectly honest with you. You look at the situation, they were a bin fire across the city. They brought in a manager that nobody had really heard of, a load of players so it can change. It can change quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You can bring in 3 or 4 players and have a plan. This is how we're going to play, and I think from day one, you knew that they knew how they were going to play, and the bumps in the road, you kept at it. The support stayed with it. The players believed in it, and I think that's the thing. I think the players, whether they're players that have been there over the last 9 months or players that are coming in, they have to buy into what Philippe Clement is asking. They have to buy into what he's wanting on the ball and off the ball. And again, that's a pod in itself. But I think that you can see players within the squad that are having difficulties, and I think he continually refers to that. So I think that's as important across the summer for me, how he gets his message completely ingrained. And you talk about patterns of play and etc., and the way that we actually want to play, in possession, out of possession, weren't as easy to play through, all that sort of stuff. Does that suddenly, because if you look back to the Rangers team in the first couple of months of Clement, we weren't giving up any chances.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the Rangers team that ended the season, we were giving up so many chances, sort of thing. Is that because personnel wasn't there? Is it because the fitness wasn't there and players were pulling a tractor? But it's to get back to your original point, Stephen. I certainly think that as long as we can see signs of progress, But I think having a line in the sand with regard to who you're actually watching would be helpful. And if that starting lineup has Jack Butland, Ridvan Yilmaz, Dujon Sterling, Todd Cantwell, for example, and then maybe seven fresh players, I think that would be a positive from a mentality point of view for the support as much as anything.
Yeah, we are in a position that we can actually have direct comparisons with the last two summers, which really we shouldn't have a situation like that, but we do. And we go like with Gio 2 years ago, he seemed like he didn't have the players in that he wanted to kind of do what he wanted, because at points in the early season under Gio, we were playing some really good football. The August of 2022 was magnificent for some of the football we were playing, and then we got a few injuries, and then everything just kind of fell apart with that 4-0 defeat at Parkhead. And then we look at Beale, who he got the players in that he seemed to want, and we thought this is going to be the chance for something fresh, but we still ended up seeing Barisic playing in the opening day at Rugby Park. Even if you look at pre-season that year, we didn't look particularly good in pre-season, so it wasn't like we started doing anything. And kind of that game at Ibrox in September last year seemed like the rating was on the wall kind of going into it. It was a bit of a steep task. I mean, was the PSV defeat before or after that? Can't remember where we got that absolute thrashing in Eindhoven.
It was towards the latter part of August. I'm sure it was the midweek before we played them, I think.
Yeah, so that was kind of, you kind of started to see the patterns in that. Obviously, the football wasn't there. So I think, as you mentioned, if Clement kind of comes in and we can kind of see something in the pre-season games, and obviously, as you mentioned, if he's got rid of some of the ones, I mean, I think the remaining ones from that kind of era now is the two ones we've talked about quite a lot, Tav and Goldson. But if he goes in with a kind of fresh approach and we can kind of see something different, I mean, you have a bit of faith in him doing it, given what he did in the cup final where he didn't bring Lundstrom straight back in, because so many people thought he's just going to bring him in. He loves him. But he went with Raskin and Diamandi, who were arguably our two best players on the day. So the positive signs on that one.
I think, to be honest with you, Stephen, sorry to interrupt. I think that Goldson prior to that, when Goldson was at the semi-final against Hearts, and then Goldson obviously picked up the injury, but you're putting two and two with regard to conversations that have potentially happened. So I don't think he's scared to make difficult decisions, and I think that's two examples. Goldson and Lundstrom, as much as he dressed it up as he's played a lot of football, or I can't even mind what he said, to be honest with you. But I think it's ultimately he's not playing well. That you can read between the lines. That's why he's not playing, sort of situation, So that gives me a bit of hope that he does have the. I don't doubt he's got the balls to make big decisions. It's how is he going to be able to do it because of the contractual situation, and but again that's but I think that those two players, I think will be, that's the interesting part of the summer for me. It's easy. I think it's easy to bring players in, or easier to bring players in. I think it's harder to offload those that you don't see as part of your plans, that are under contract and earning good money. And that's, I'm not just picking on those two, but those two are the ones that are the ones with the scar tissue, the ones that have been over the course so many times and had so many second prizes.
Yeah, I mean, even when you talk about Clement making big decisions, we can go back to the end of 2023, one that's quite controversial to a lot of people at the time, in that Europa League game where he took Todd Cantwell off in the first half. People were like, well, if you're not playing great, you've got Sam Lammers in there who's doing absolutely hee-haw. Why do you not bring him off? Sam Lammers, with his faults, would at least have a bit of a shape when they were off the ball, which I think Clement quite liked about him, but at the end of the day, couldn't really know too much his lack of attacking quality here. he seems to love being in his home country, but that's a different topic altogether. So he does know he's not feared to ruffle feathers, which I think you need to as a manager, because we've had maybe far too many examples of managers who want to be the players' pals. I mean, Alex McCoy is a perfect example where everybody loves it. Ali, we know what he did as a player. He was a good number 2 for Walter Smith, but I think that was the thing. He was the kind of the fun man to Walter Smith's hard, exterior, or just hard general, just the absolute leader that he was. So when McCoy's came into the job, he was kind of seen as a bit of just a guy who has a laugh with his pals. I mean, we watched McGregor's podcast he did the other day with Tubes and Jimmy Bullard. We'll kind of get that picture of what he did as a coach. Even Michael Beale seemed like he was a guy who was more interested, more as a pal for them. And you kind of, as much as he talked about rebuilds, he didn't really, other than the ones who were out of contract, didn't ship off many of the guys who were there with him when he was the coach the first time. So I think with that aspect, I feel quite confident in Clement doing it. I think he's shown if he's got the players available, he can get the. He got a tune out of Lundstrom when it wasn't a Thursday night. I mean, that's a thing. That's got to be something. I mean, when that Europa League theme tune wasn't playing, you wondered if John Lundstrom knew how to play football, and he was able to do that.
And that's the thing. I think it's forgotten. It's now that using him as the example. His Rangers career has ended not the way he would have wanted, but his performances between November and the end of February were excellent, and it's so he's managed, as you say, Mr. Thursday Night, was like consistently. You remember he got injured before the New Year Old Firm game, and everybody was devastated because he'd got injured. He then played, I don't think, at his fittest sort of situation, but it just shows you how things can change the perception of the support. Everybody was going to be devastated that John Lundstrom wasn't going to start that game, and then 3 months later, folk would have walked past them in the street, sort of situation, So I think, the Cantwell one's a good example as well with regard to the manager, and I think that towards the end of the season, I think when he only had the cup final to really focus on, I think his press conferences, the tone had changed a wee bit with regard to, he wasn't throwing them quite under a bus, but it's then transmitting those conversations, what conversations happened after the cup final. Did any conversations happen? What conversations have they just been given their training plan to go away? When they go back, and it's how he then gets the messages into the players from the end of June.
I think reading from the outside, you could kind of get an idea that I think even he knew there was a bit of a fragility about them. So if he was to throw X, Y, and Z under the bus and play them, he wouldn't get the reaction that you would like to see as a football manager. He would have got what we've seen so often from them, just drift into their shells, and we don't really get anything of it. I love your example about the Lundstrom one at Parkhead, because the other one I remember when he was very early on at his day was just after we beat Hearts in the League Cup semi-final. Scott Wright came off the bench and scored, and then he missed the European game after it, and there was so many people that were devastated that Scott Wright was injured. If you could get that effect out of a guy who we really in the recent weeks can't trap a ball when he's got probably 10 yards of space all around his peripherals, then what we got. So I do think there is a level of confidence that one. Then I think if you look at kind of the guys as well that he brought in January, Cortez, who's now coming back, looked the part when he was there. I think his injury, him and Ridvan's injuries coinciding with each other, was massive for us, because we had to then shift to a different approach, playing Silva wide left who wants to come inside, playing Barisic who likes to pass back the way, that type of aspects of that. And then obviously Diamante, who I think looks like he hates the other side of the old firm more than any player that had been there for 6 years, and he'd been there for in 6 months. So it's just that type of thing you could argue about Silva. I mean, Silva's different. kettle of fish. But I think I have a level of confidence. Again, look at the rumours we kind of talked about between him and Coupon. I don't know if I pronounced his name right. Apologies. That they can do something with it, and they've got that within there. And I just think I don't want to speak too soon, because I did a column last year where I spoke really far too soon about Brendan Rodgers facing a different animal, Michael Beale. That's a completely bad statement. So I'm not wanting to speak too soon, but I do have a bit more positive feeling about it. But again, it's still early doors. We need to wait and see. Is there anything else, Cammy, you think from a fan point of view that the support would like to see?
No, to be honest with you, I think that the next couple of months will be very interesting. Just who goes out the door as much as anything else. But I do, with it repeating myself again, Tavernier and Goldson, I think, are a problem for the manager, and because of the negative outlook that I think a huge amount of the support have for the two players, just because of the fact that they have been second prize so many times and part of. So I think that's a big part of the job that Philip Clement has got and Niels Coppin has got on this summer, because I think that I want him to be successful. I just want to see a Rangers team that I can identify with and actually see what we are trying to do. And this summer is the start of, I think we'll need 2 or 3 good windows. But if you can get a strong spine, and sign in, get in some good quality, I think I've got faith that he can do a job next season. But the getting players out the door and not having, because I think that'll drive a lot of what we do this summer. I don't think we can carry a massive squad. So getting players out the door that are under contract is going to be the challenge. But I think the manager's made big decisions across the period, and I'm sure he's got a few more to make between now and the start of the season.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the big thing kind of to wrap up on that one, if you compare again to the great Walter Smith, at that point, he knew that nothing was bigger than the club. But in the current day and age, player power is so much more of a thing than it was. So you hope that if the likes of Tavernier and Goldson, if there's any form of conversation that it might not, if clubs come in for them and then they're kind of swaying on it, you maybe have to think to themselves. I mean, Tav talks about having a testimonial, cementing his legacy. I think an idea of cementing your legacy is knowing the right time to know that you're being more of a detriment to the club in terms of your playing ability. I think we had that issue with Alan McGregor. We kept him one season too long, and it kind of meant that the kind of how he was thought of in the eyes of the club kind of didn't get the appreciation he did when he eventually kind of left. So I think that's something the two of them have to look at. But again, that's mentioned a big summer ahead for Philip Clement, and it is something that we'll be covering pretty intensively here on the Rangers Journal. As I mentioned at the start of the show, we've got lots of content on this YouTube channel coming up over the summer, obviously with the Euros on, so much still to talk about in terms of Rangers. So yeah, lots to do. So if you've not hit the subscribe button, hit it now and you'll get all this content and much more. Cammy, I'd like to thank you for joining me in this particular podcast. It's been a good one.
Thank you. It's been good. As always, we could have. You can go off. You can go up different paths when you're talking about Rangers. There's so many aspects to it. It's never as simple as we would all like, but it's always good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's never simple being a Rangers fan. That's the joys of it. I think if it was simple, the level of content that you'd have would diminish spectacularly. But yeah, thanks again for joining me. I've been Stephen Wilson, and from the Rangers Journal, we'll catch